In 2004, Chief Joel Heckman retired from the Centennial Lakes Police Department. What many did not know was that Joel was retiring in order to gear up for the fight of his life, the fight for his life. Here's Ben with more on this amazing story of survival and service.
When we last saw Joel Heckman on North Metro TV, he was retiring as the Chief of Police for the Centennial Lakes Police Department. His retirement at the age of 51 caused many to wonder why he would choose to walk away from a department that he had served with since 1990. The reality was that just a few months earlier, Heckman had received news that changed his life forever.
It was in 2004 at the beginning that I was diagnosed with a autoimmune disease called sarcoidosis.
After the initial diagnosis, Heckman sought out more information on his exact condition, and the news was startling.
In meeting with a doctor down at Mayo, one of 6 in the world that has done research into cardiac sarcoidosis, I was informed that from diagnosis to death was 5 years.
With only a few years to live, Heckman took an early retirement in order to spend more time with his family. He also spent time giving back to his community by working at a local school. But eventually, his condition robbed him of that work as well.
I deteriorated to the point where I needed to have a pacemaker defibrillator implanted. It was at Unity Hospital, and my heart just took off, and the medical staff was in a semicircle around me, actually waiting for my heart to just explode. I was fortunate that it didn't, but they wouldn't release me from the hospital until they put in a pacemaker defibrillator. And then my heart deteriorated to the point where I couldn't walk from one side of the room to the other.
Then, in 2009, 5 years after the initial diagnosis, Heckman was given a second chance at life.
And I was very fortunate to receive a heart transplant in February of 2009.
After recovering from the transplant surgery, Heckman decided it was once again time to serve his community. Going back on active duty wasn't an option, but he felt a deeper calling to serve the officers of his former department.
After receiving the heart, even though I picked up a virus from my donor and was quite ill for the first year, after recovering from that, I was able to return to school to finish my training. I enrolled with the MESCA program. It's the Minnesota Emergency Service Chaplain Association, and they started the program training chaplains to serve in a ministry of presence and service and relationships with any walk of life that you would encounter. And then came back to the department here and asked them if they would be willing to have me serve voluntarily as their police chaplain, and they welcomed me with open arms, which I was very grateful for.
The chaplain program at the Centennial Lakes Police Department was started about 2 years ago, and at first, it was an adjustment for both Joel and the officers.
A lot of the officers, I was their boss, and so the first thing I had to tell them is, now you're my boss, I'm here to serve you. And a lot of them I did the backgrounds on. And so I had a relationship with them and felt very comfortable. My biggest concern at first was actually making them feel comfortable with me.
Joel serves as both an internal chaplain for the officers and as an external chaplain for the community. Sergeant Russ Blank, who worked to start the chaplain program, considers it his proudest accomplishment in his 17 years with the department. Blank has seen lives torn apart by trauma, and now Joel is a resource the department can provide to its emotionally distraught citizens.
We arrive on scene. When I say we, I mean the patrol officers arrive on scene, and they're encountering people at their emotional worst. A loved one has just passed away, especially when it's unexpected, and they are in the utmost crisis that they're going to find themselves in their life, usually at that point in time. Officers are there to perform a number of functions, police-related functions as well as compassionate functions, but oftentimes the scenario that they find themselves in requires them to act in their capacity as an officer, and they have less time to provide the kind of compassion and service and comfort that the situation requires. That's when the chaplain steps in.
When Joel enters a crisis situation, he relies on his deep personal faith, but his first concern is to supply immediate comfort to those who are grieving.
You don't need someone coming out and proselytizing their faith. Your faith is important to you and you need to stay true to that, but on the other hand, you're there to serve and to provide a ministry of presence and to comfort. And if something becomes of that later on down the road, that's something to deal with later. But we're basically, as chaplains, called on to be that person to provide the strength and comfort and support and any help we can.
According to Sergeant Blank, Joel's background in policing has been such an asset in his new role as chaplain.
Joel was a patrol officer, he was a detective, he was Detective of the Year, he was deputy chief, and then he was the chief. So Joel understands policing, he understands cops. He's very good at what he does as a chaplain, and when officers come to him with issues on an internal as opposed to an external basis, he's there for them. He understands them. He doesn't have to be brought up to speed. And it's not just the officers, it's the sworn and non-sworn staff as well as their families. So Joel is in demand.
And with Joel's background, he knows that the emotions of a police officer need to be dealt with properly.
In the olden days, I say in the 50s and 60s and even the 70s, the officers were to be tough. And so you went home and you either took it out in the bottle or you took it out on your family members, and which was totally unhealthy. And yes, when you're dealing with traumatic situations, your emotions need to be dealt with.
Joel's service doesn't end with the police department. He also serves with Second Chance for Life Foundation, a heart transplant support group, and is a spokesperson for LifeSource, an organ procurement center. Joel believes that his life was saved so that he could serve others. His police department and community are extremely grateful for his outlook on his second chance at life.
And to be able to be here, to give that back, is something that I feel that the Lord saved me from death to do something to help others, and I want to respond to that and do what I can to be available for whatever the need may be.
Joel was my chief, he was my supervisor when I was the department's detective, and I think the world of him on a professional level, I think the world of him on a personal level, and I can't think of anybody better suited to do the job that he's doing, to play the role that he's playing.
And having been given the gift of a second chance at life, I just feel so blessed to be able to come back and to work with the individuals that I worked with before.
For North Metro TV News, Ben Hale reporting.